What should my kid pack for college?
I don't know.
How much spending money?
I don't know.
What should we talk about?
I don't know.
So how can I be sure that my kid is keeping up with his classwork?
I don't know. What are we going to do if there are no in-person classes? I don't know.
College Ready 2020. A crash course preparing college parents for the road ahead. Hello, I'm Andrea McCarren, your host for College Ready 2020. We've all heard people say it's not what you know, it's who you know. Like it or not, there's a lot of truth to this old expression, and for many people, some of their most important social connections were established during their college years. In this episode, we explore the importance of social life as part of the college experience, along with the social adjustments, expectations, opportunities, and pressures students may need to deal with. We also discuss how parents can help college students successfully navigate these opportunities and perhaps even deepen their own relationships in the process. To better understand the parents' role in their students' collegiate social lives, we spoke with Angelica McLean.
Angelica McLean,
Assistant Director for Parent and Family Programs at Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis, also known as IEP-UI. And Betsy Chapman.
Betsy Chapman,
Executive Director of Family Communications at Wake Forest University. As with other topics discussed in this series, communication and cooperation between parents and students is the foundation for success during the transition to college. Our conversation about social norms starts with the basic concept that parents and students should be partners.
we are constantly wanting to serve our parents and our families or our supporters of the students. As soon as our families and our parents understand that partnership can excel and it can be a phenomenal partnership, but there's got to be this two-way street. I'm working with some families who might be extremely resistant to information that's coming from the university. Maybe they don't like the information that's coming from the university, and I completely understand that. But at the same point, I am trying to also provide a gateway into the university because ideally their student is an adult, right? They are 18 years old, they're 19, 20, however old. They are truly an adult. And so they actually can do a lot of these things on their own. However, I think that a lot of institutions and a lot of universities are seeing the value of parents and families and having that support, because we all know that there are going to be students who, as soon as they get out of that exam or as soon as they maybe do that job interview, the first person that they're going to call is those parents or those family members or those supporters of them throughout the years. That is a known fact that is who they're going to call or who they're going to share some excitement with or maybe some downfalls. And so I think the moment that our families do understand that our office, or at least us as professionals on campus, are really looking out for both sides, for yes, their student, but also for them as well.
Parent and family relations professionals are really in that dual role. We're there to try to support our family's journey. And sometimes that is counter to what their students need. So sometimes parents and families will contact us and say, I really need X or Y. I want access to this, or I want to be able to change this for my student or whatnot. And we'll say in a loving and supportive way, what we really need here is for your student to take the action, or let your student be the decision maker on these things, because that's how they're going to learn better and grow better. So we share the same goals of the best outcome for our students. That's what our families want, and that's what we want as administrators and professionals. Sometimes the way we get there is a little different than families might like, but we do work with the interest of our students in mind to help their best development.
This is a time for your student to definitely expand. And so I think you should let them do that. I think that there is some value in failures. There is value in them being successful. They should also be partners with their students too, and ask them questions, help guide them, but not necessarily say, hey, you need to do X, Y, Z, but instead say, what do you think about doing this? Or what are your thoughts on this? It's that communication piece that is also really important.
Okay, I know what some of you parents are thinking. College costs a lot of money, and post-graduation success depends upon academic achievement. While academic achievement is certainly one factor in determining postgraduate success, our guests emphasize the importance of parents adjusting their expectations to allow room for their students' social and extracurricular life.
Parents definitely should be partners when it comes to the expectations and within the communication piece to their students on their social activities. So I am fully aware that a student is attending college to get a degree or to succeed within their academics. We are all fully aware of that. There's research and there's studies that there is so much value within those extracurricular activities. And those extracurricular activities could be that social piece. It could be an on-campus job. It could be a leadership role within a student organization. It could be volunteering within the community or on campus. It's a variety of things that are considered those extracurricular activities. Parents and families should definitely be supportive of that, because at the end of the day, when they go to a job interview, yes, they're going to talk about some pieces of those academics. But I think as someone who is an employer of students on campus, I want to hear about those experiences that you are having interacting with individuals, interacting with other professionals. I want to hear about those past experiences that you've had or how you have been employed. As a family member, I think that it is extremely important that they get those experiences. And I would encourage our families to also encourage their students to get that as well and to not be so academic focused, because at the end of the day, it'll pay off.
Your students are going to learn a tremendous amount of things in the classroom. And that's typically what we think of when we send our children to college. We want them to learn their subject matter and get a degree. But there's also an enormous amount of lateral learning that takes place outside of the classroom. So one of the conversations that I have sometimes, either with students who come to me for advice or when I speak to parents or family members, is you have to weigh the balance of how much time and effort, whether that's physical effort, mental energy, anxiety, et cetera, do I have to put in to get this particular grade? And what do I give up for that? So I'm not very good at math. And it takes me an inordinate amount of energy and time and stress to get a halfway decent math grade. Is it worth 20 extra hours in the library to get an A instead of a B? And what do I give up if I have taken those 20 extra hours? That's time maybe that I'm not involved in a club or an organization. That's time that maybe I'm not sleeping when sleeping would be a benefit. That's time that I might not be bonding with my friends and classmates. So while I would never tell a student, I want you to shoot low academically, I certainly don't mean it like that. What I do talk to sometimes is about if it's going to take a pound of flesh for you to get a 4.0, what are you losing and what are you gaining by that? And what you don't want is to have a student get to the end of their 4-year degree or even a 2-year degree and say, I spent so much time only studying that I never made meaningful connections with friends, or I didn't have at least one side passion. I never volunteered, or I didn't have time to do this. So I think it's about balance and just making sure that you're putting your energies in appropriate directions.
Given the importance of extracurricular activities and social life, we asked our guests to suggest specific topics, such as alcohol consumption and campus safety, that parents and students should discuss before school begins.
Parents and families should have some conversations with their students before they drop them off relative to social life, and it can fall in a number of different directions. The question that I get most often from families is, what about drinking? What about parties? What's the real scoop? The answer is that on most college campuses, you're going to find a wide variety of behaviors sort of across a spectrum. You'll have very studious students, and you'll have some party-hardy students, and you'll have a whole lot of gray area in between. The important things to think about and talk about as a family are, what is your expectation about the percentage of time you're working and the percentage of time you're playing or engaging in extracurriculars? What does your student know about alcohol and alcohol use? I think it's really important to consider that a lot of high school students don't necessarily have a ton of personal experience with alcohol, but they will be thrust into colleges across this country where alcohol and other drugs might be something that they could get. And so do they understand how many drinks it takes to be intoxicated or to have your judgment be clouded. So I think there's some kind of basic, almost medical type information about the reality of drinking that is something parents and families should talk about. And every family is going to have its own sort of expectation about what is okay behavior. And that's not for me or any parent and family relations professional to hand down to them, but just to say, have that conversation about what does responsibility look like in a social setting? Does that mean you drink? If so, how much? Does it mean it's okay as long as you don't drive home? Lots of those kinds of questions. But I think it's also helpful for parents and families to arm their students with some approval not to engage in those activities. There's a pervasive myth among college students that everybody is drinking all the time, and that's simply not the case. And to help students who might not yet have the psychological development or the emotional understanding to find ways to say no. I say to some of my academic advisees frequently, you can go to a party, and I know you're a first-year student and you're underage. You can stand there and just talk. You don't have to have a red Solo cup in your hand. Or you can decline to drink from any number of reasons, whether you have a medical thing happening or you have a ethical thing, religious thing. But you can go to parties and you can have fun, and you don't have to put yourself in a situation that you're uncomfortable. You just have to be willing to know what your boundaries are and stick to those.
I always talk a lot about personal safety. Our campus happens to be in a very downtown area. And so a lot of the times I talk with our families about personal safety and what does that look like. It's important to learn campus, understanding, where campus ends, where it starts, where is the downtown area. But then also using the buddy system, I think, is also a great conversation for our families to talk about. There are resources on a lot of campuses that have a partnership with the university police department, and maybe it's a safe walk program that they can use. But having that knowledge beforehand, before they're on campus, I think is really important. Time management also in a social life is hard. If your student is wanting to get involved on campus and that is taking a leadership role on campus, that is another piece of time that maybe they just quite don't understand, that it might look different from high school, obviously, to college. Classes could end at 5:00. Well, that means, where does dinner and maybe going to that class meeting or that student organization meet? I always tend to talk to our parents about that time management piece, and that they really need to have that conversation with their student and balancing their time, especially if that wasn't a thing they had to do in high school for first-year students.
However, not every student is the same. Some students are more outgoing and others tend to keep to themselves. And so there is no one-size-fits-all set of recommendations for adjusting to campus social life. For extroverted students, a parent's guidance should center around keeping their student focused on coursework. For introverted students, the academics may come naturally, but parents will need to encourage their students to participate in the extracurricular and social opportunities offered by their school.
The conversation I would have if I had a student who was an extrovert is, you are here for the academic piece of school and to focus on that. And, let's talk about those expectations on grades and GPA from the parent's perspective, and then ensuring that that student understands that expectation when it comes to academics. Parents of extroverted children or students definitely need to have that conversation beforehand, because if not, they're going to get on campus and they are going to have probably one of the best experiences, just because I think all of us have some type of a welcome week or welcome weeks. But within those first couple of 6 weeks, there are so many programs happening on campus. There are so many extracurricular activities that are happening on campus, and that can be somewhat overwhelming, not only for introverts, but also for extroverts, that sometimes they lose focus.
There are obviously extroverts in the world and introverts in the world. And my observation over my career has been that sometimes it's a lot easier for our extroverted students to put themselves out there, to find groups and organizations and clubs to belong to. So there's really two things I would encourage parents and family members to talk about with their introvert children. One is, I know it's uncomfortable perhaps to put yourself out there and join a group. I'm an introvert myself, and every time I say I'm going to go to a conference or a party or something like that, it seems like a great idea 3 weeks before, and the more I get up close to it, the less fun it seems. And I just have to constantly kind of tamp down that introvert nature of mine when there are reasons that you can and should join in. And one of the things, especially for first-year students, is that the way you find your campus connections is typically through involvement. So even for introverts, you can put on your, I can do something hard hat and go out and say, you know what, I'm going to go to that mixer, or I'm going to go to that club or organization. Understand, though, what your limits are, so you don't have to do 20 things. You can find 1 or 2 things. And even within that group, you don't have to make 50 friends. You can make 2, 3, 5, 1 acquaintance, and that's still broadened your social circle. The other thing I would encourage parents and families to talk about with each other, parents as partners, is if you are an extrovert parent and you have an introvert child, their college experience might look very different from yours because they're a different person and they have different goals. So it might have been a wonderful thing in your extroverted experience to rush a fraternity or a sorority or go to social events all the time. And that may not be your student's speed. But don't fall into the trap of thinking they're not taking advantage of everything college has to offer, or they're not having a good time. They're just going to be doing it in a way that suits their introverted nature that would not have been appropriate for you, but might be very appropriate for them. So the idea of just letting college students have their own experience and not try to measure it up against your own if you had gone to college yourself as a parent or family member.
As with most other aspects of collegiate life, the COVID-19 health crisis will have a significant impact on students' ability to participate in social and extracurricular activities. We asked our guests to discuss their experiences from the spring 2020 semester and how those experiences might be reflected in campus life this fall.
COVID really presented, in some ways, a hand grenade in the middle of students' social lives because so much of college activity for many students is a collective process. For many students, they're collectively living in a residence hall. They're in class together. They're in a variety of extracurriculars, whether that's intramural sports or faith-based groups or whatever, but they find themselves in community. And then suddenly, with so many campuses having to vacate this spring due to COVID, everyone had to be very creative and very nimble about how to foster those relationships virtually. And students are really remarkably nimble in these instances. And again, our current college students have grown up as digital natives. So they are used to interacting over Instagram or Snapchat or TikTok or Vine or whatever the current social media du jour is. So they were still able to maintain some of those connections, but they also found creative ways to do things together. So I'll give an example from Wake Forest, where I work. We have a student philanthropic endeavor every year called Wake and Shake, which is a 12-hour dance marathon that raises money for cancer research. And Wake and Shake was planning to take place in April, I believe, when everyone was gone. And rather than cancel that event, which has a huge number of students that participate in it, they decided to make it virtual. So people were doing videos of themselves and tagging themselves in Instagram and other places, showing how they were dancing. We had Greek organizations that normally do a service project. There's a sorority that did a 5K for something. And instead of obviously being able to do it all on campus and make a big celebration of it, the sisters went and in their own hometowns ran a 5K on their own time and celebrated that way. And so anything from, I've heard of students doing like Zoom dinners together to having, an office hours chat with their faculty. Students have found ways to make that happen, and it certainly doesn't substitute the kind of interactions they would have in person. But this is one of those situations where we all have to make lemonade out of lemons, and they're trying the best that they can to find those moments of virtual connection.
Generation Z is so digital that they probably are thriving in this, and they are just figuring out any type of way that they can have that connection or that human connection. And although it's not that maybe physical touch piece of it, this generation is just thriving on that. Not to say that it isn't hard, because I think it is. I think going 3 plus 4 months into the pandemic and not being able to either see someone outside of the screen, whether that's on a phone or a computer, but I think that that is truly hard. And I think for our extrovert students, this is really taking a toll on them. I will say that. So I think for those social pieces, I think we are all trying to get very creative.
It doesn't matter whether your student is an incoming freshman or a graduating senior, and it doesn't matter whether they'll be taking classes from their bedroom at home or you'll be driving them hundreds of miles away. Before classes begin this year, you need to speak to your student about money.
It is hard for parents to talk to their kids about personal finance, but you have to do it. It is critical.
That's Jamie Gayton, Executive Vice President of the Pentagon Federal Credit Union, PenFed, who served for 30 years in the U.S. Army after graduating from West Point. He's the author of the Guide to Personal Financial Planning for the Armed Forces and has taught financial literacy courses for the cadets at West Point, family readiness groups throughout the Army, and a variety of other groups and community organizations. Jamie is also the father of 2 teenagers and a young adult. For this episode of College Ready Money Moments, we asked Jamie to give us some insight into picking the right financial institution for students attending college.
That's a great question. One thing that they need to do is figure out how to select the financial institution that makes the most sense for them. There are banks and there are credit unions out there, but some of the key questions you need to make sure you answer and to make sure that we're putting the students in the right place. Do they have online and mobile access? Do they charge ATM fees? Do they have deposit rates and loan rates that are reasonable so that we can use this credit union for the long term? Because most people, once they get attached to a credit union or a bank, they end up staying there for a long period of time. We've got to make sure that we have helped them identify those key elements that they should look at to identify which one of these credit unions or banks makes the most sense for them in the long run. It shouldn't be that when we drop them off at school, the closest bank or the closest credit union to that school is the one they end up going with. It should be which ones have ATMs in that location, which ones don't charge fees. So it's important for us to take a look at how we select the financial institution that's going to be best for our students.
PenFed Credit Union serves over 2 million members worldwide, offering market-leading certificates, checking, credit cards, personal loans, mortgages, auto loans, and student loans, with members' interests always in mind. For more information concerning the personal financial challenges faced by college students, please visit PenFed at penfed.org.
It can be difficult for parents to know exactly where to begin when discussing personal conduct and collegiate social life. Every college and university has an official student code of conduct, which lays out the school's expectations for student behavior. And familiarizing yourself and your student with this code of conduct is an excellent place to start your conversation.
On every single college campus, there is a student code of conduct on how you should behave. While you are living on campus, while you are a student, I would encourage our families and our parents and our students to review that before they get on campus so they have a full understanding of the expectations that the university has set forth for them. Those are the rules or the regulations or the procedures that they should follow. And if they don't follow those, there is a consequence.
Parents and families need an understanding of what their students will be held accountable for. Students are the ones that are going to have to live that and uphold it. So I do think there's more of a burden on them to know it. But I think it's important to know things like if you have an alcohol violation, what might happen? If you have an academic violation, what might happen? Just so that you're aware of what those expectations are. And I would also encourage you always to use the university sources for those rules and regulations, as opposed to like, I'm on a group chat with 7 other families and there's some upperclassmen and they're saying, here's how X works. You always want to go to the source material, if you will, and make sure you know what's happening. But I do think it's important to know what you have to abide by. If you have a housing contract, if you're living on campus, what are the rules and regulations of being in university-owned housing? what are the applicable rules for how we treat other people on this campus? And I do think those are good things to know and review. Those things will largely be reviewed during orientation with students, but it's also helpful sometimes families, particularly if they went to college themselves, that's probably 20 years or more in their rearview mirror. And so knowing what is acceptable today that may not have been acceptable when they were students or vice versa is important, just to know what those differences are.
To give parents a glimpse of what's coming, we asked our guests to discuss the primary social adjustments they see for students in each year of their college career.
For the first year, I think the social adjustment that students need to be prepared for is that growing into your college home takes time, and making friends takes time, and feeling like this is my place takes time. It is not unusual for first-year college students to feel a bit off balance, kind of like they're walking on quicksand for the first semester or even through the first year. It just takes a while to get adjusted, and they're not counting on how much change it is from being a senior in high school where I knew my friends and I knew exactly where I existed in the social hierarchy of my high school to suddenly coming to college and you have to start from zero in terms of making friends and finding your group and so forth. So the first year can feel rocky. And I think loneliness, particularly in the first few weeks of school, can be a very real thing. And that feels strange for students because how can I be on a campus with thousands and thousands of other people my age and feel lonely? But it just takes a while to find your people. So students should be ready for the fact that it takes work to be adjusting to college. And families should not panic when they hear their students going through these very real periods of, I'm not sure that this is my place, or I haven't found my friends yet, or I'm eating lunch by myself, or those things. Parents at that point can just coach, get involved, join campus organizations, put yourself out there because those social connections will happen. They just don't happen 5 minutes after you've moved in. So I think that's where the myth of college being the best 4 years of your life, as shown in TV and movies, can be really harmful to students as they adjust once they've first started college. The beauty for a lot of students sophomore year is that you know what you're doing, right? You know other people, you've found some friends, you might be choosing your major or already into your major, and so things feel a little bit more grounded. There's sometimes people talk about the sophomore slump, but I think generally speaking, you have a decent sense of this is my place, I know my way around, you feel your footing. So I think for some that can be easier as a sophomore. For junior year, for some students, it's hitting that realization that college is halfway over. And now that I'm looking down the hill instead of up the hill, they realize either there's a lot of things that I still want to get done, and they start to branch out and do more of those things. But I also want to speak to the fact that, at least at my school, we have a reasonable number of students that go abroad their junior year. And in the pre-COVID days when that was happening normally, what would happen a lot is that our students, say they went abroad in the fall, they come back in the spring and campus looks the same and it's the same people there, but suddenly their worldview has been expanded through this abroad experience. And so they have some questions about, I used to think X was really important, whether that was going to this party or having a leadership role in this group or being in a Greek organization. And now that I've seen the great big wide world, maybe that thing I thought that was so important isn't as important anymore. And there's some real dissonance in how do I reconcile the fact that I just had this mind expanding semester away and I come back to some of the same things I once saw. So there's a little bit of that for those who have gone abroad. For senior year, students are rightly concerned about what's next. If they don't already have a plan for graduate or professional school or getting a job, that's when students often start to go in that direction.
An aspect of collegiate life which can have lifelong implications for students is the development of significant personal relationships. We asked our guests to discuss some of the social norms around dating and long-term partner relationships as part of campus life.
For many of us who graduated around 30-ish years ago, There were often people who were boyfriend-girlfriend, so to speak, or boyfriend-boyfriend, girlfriend-girlfriend. But there were people who were partnered up in a rather serious way. So it was not unusual to see people holding hands during the daytime as they walked across campus, or somebody giving a kiss to someone else before class. So there were a lot of serious relationships 25 or 30 years ago, and it was not out of the realm of possibility that right before graduation or sometime within your senior year, you might know people who had gotten engaged. I knew a handful of people that had gotten engaged prior to my graduating in 1992. That is not the norm today. Students are much less likely to get into a long-term serious relationship. And students are more likely to have a broader variety of experiences, often fueled by alcohol, where you go to a party and you have a few drinks and there's a cute person there and maybe you hook up, and you can define hookup in a number of ways. And I'm going to let you all use your imaginations, but you may very well have some casual physical relationships of varying intensities without having a solid commitment in the same way that we might have done 25 or 30 years ago. And I can't for the life of me explain it other than to say, I think in some senses that our students have relationship FOMO, that if I commit myself to this person, I have the fear of missing out that maybe this other person would have been better for me. I don't see a lot of long-term partnering up. And that to me has been a big change, which is not to say people don't get involved with each other, but not necessarily in the same kind of commitment.
I think that there is that fear of missing out on something. Could be other people. It could be other experiences. It could be anything. And so I think that the students of this day and age are just, that's not what they really want to do. And there are so many apps that are out to create those relationships that were not available about 10 years ago. And so that was not a thing to have Tinder or Bumble or whatever it is. Like there was none of those kind of applications or apps. And so students are looking for ways to have a relationship.
Life is full of setbacks that we all need to overcome, and this also applies to a student's social life at college. It may very well happen that your student ends up in some sort of difficulties at school, be it academic, extracurricular, social, or emotional. When these difficulties arise, knowing how to gauge your response is critical. We asked our guests how parents should react in these circumstances in order to best help their children.
I think the first thing you do in a crisis is figure out, is this a physical crisis where life, health, safety is an issue? And if so, those are moments that are very appropriate for parents and loved ones to get involved. I also really think it's a good idea over the summer for parents and family members and students to sit down and look at their university's website and say, if there's some kind of crime situation or an emergency, what do I do? So know how to reach your university's campus police, but also a lot of our colleges have put out sort of detailed emergency preparedness. What happens if there's a tornado? What does it mean to shelter in place? So I think some of the things that are emergency related or crisis related, half the battle is knowing what to do so you're not fumbling in an emergency. So spend some time over the summer looking at whatever emergency preparedness information is out there for students so you know what happens. There are also things that feel like social crises to students that might not rise to the occasion of actual crises. For example, if your student doesn't get the leadership position that they wanted, or wanted to get into this Greek organization and got cut, or had some kind of big blowout with friends and family, your student might call home and say, the sky is falling, everything is terrible. And as parents and family members, when we hear our children in pain, our first reaction is frequently to jump right into sort of fix-it mode. And this is where we really encourage parents to step back and allow their students to experience what they're feeling in ways that will help them learn to self-soothe, if you will. So instead of me as a mother saying, oh, honey, I know that's so terrible. Like, I'm going to fly you home this weekend and we'll, go to all of your favorite places and, distract. Learn the value of letting your children experience disappointment and working through those feelings. And that's how they ultimately build the resilience muscles they're going to need for the rest of their lives. So you can listen and you can empathize without jumping in and rescuing. My default would probably be, if it's not a life, health, safety thing, understand that it's your student's situation and it's theirs to solve. If they have a problem, rather than direct them on how to fix it, encourage some reflective questions. Gosh, honey, I can tell how upset you are. That sounds like such a terrible situation. What things have you thought of that might help bring out a positive resolution? So you're not telling them how to fix it as much as you are just prompting them to think about those things. But also, as parents and family members, getting comfortable with the idea that your students will call you at some point and they'll be unhappy. And that's not a crisis. It's normal that they'll get a bad test or they'll have a spat with their roommate, or maybe the romantic partner they're interested in isn't interested in them. And students frequently call their loved ones in those moments to sort of vent all that frustration. And as they do that venting to you, you're left with a great deal of anxiety and worry that things aren't okay. But frequently, 5 seconds later, after they've hung up the phone or stopped texting you, they feel better for having said it. So sort of knowing the real line between what is a crisis and what is just a normal bad day, and not letting the fact that you're physically distant from them automatically make you jump into fix it mode just because you feel bad that there's nothing you can do right then.
Attending college can certainly be a stressful experience for both students and parents. It's a major life transition. However, if you're open to it, it can also be an amazing opportunity for positive growth and deepening your relationship with your child.
The thing that parents learn most about their student is who they really are as a person. They learn their interests, their hobbies, their friends. And that might look very different than what it did in high school for them, or what their parents had seen or their family members had seen when they were in high school. They're able to see their student grow into this young adult that truly can be absolutely beautiful and breathtaking.
I hear families over and over again talk about what a joy it is to get to know their children's friends at school, to see, who's important to my child, who's their best friend, who's their roommate, who are the people that they hang out with. And I think they enjoy seeing the kinds of relationships that their children develop that don't have anything to do with moms, dads, and loved ones. These are all relationships they formed on their own.
And as it turns out, the key to a deeper relationship with your student is quite simple. Be there for them and listen.
Have grace and have a conversation with them, but have it be a little free-lighted, that it's just not, well, how did you do in this class? Or did you make that leadership position? But I mean, really, really asking their student how they are doing, asking how they are even liking their experience or their college, because I don't think that some parents or families ask their student that. I think they kind of beat around the bush on some of those pieces, but I mean, asking those very direct questions and just seeing what your student says, especially for first year students going into the first 6 weeks, are extremely important for their own development and their own success. And so I think asking those questions, how they are enjoying their experiences, listening to their student, I would say is the most important.
I remember my late father would ask me before he wrote every tuition check, are you sure you want to go back? Is this the right place for you? I appreciated him asking that because it wasn't a foregone conclusion. And of course, I always said yes, but I always felt like I had some autonomy in that decision. And I think it's so important as you're shifting in the balance of power, if you will, in the parental or loved one relationship, from mom or dad or a loved one being the one who decides things and tells the student, here's what you're going to do. You're shifting that balance so it's more of a partnership. And so that was always a really important question. The flip side of that is, especially for first year students, if they tell you they want to transfer, I would encourage you to, absent a really solid reason, ask them to wait a full year, because so often the adjustment to college is so long and it's difficult in ways that students aren't anticipating, that if you let them know mid-October, okay, yes, you can transfer at the end of the semester, they sort of write off the trying to get acclimated to college. If you say, yes, but it'll be after this first year, get a year of college under your belt, very often students will be able to find their niche and fit in and be happy there, but it might take a semester or a semester and a half to do it. So don't go too quickly the route of transferring just for adjustment issues, unless, of course, there is a really solid reason that makes sense.
The college years are an important time of social development, and parents have an important role to play in supporting their students' growth. You probably have some difficult conversations in front of you, but with a little preparation, you may find that you can deepen your relationship with your student during their important transition to adulthood. I'm Andrea McCarren. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to helping you get prepared for college on our next episode of the College Ready 2020 podcast. Please subscribe to College Ready 2020 wherever you get your podcasts so that you'll receive future episodes. And please also leave us a review to help others find the show too. For parents of college students, additional guidance can be found at collegeready.guide. This show was created in cooperation with the Association of Higher Education Parent-Family Program Professionals, or AHEPPP. College Ready 2020 is a production of Wise Action.
Audiation.